The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett.
Everybody's talking about consciousness. Everybody wants that eternal kiss. Yeah, everyone's saying there's more than this. Everyone wants to follow their own bliss. Talking about one love, one blood, one life in everyone. One life, give each other. We are sisters and brothers. We sing Om.
On the Expansion Zone, we examine life and our quest to understand who and what we are and of the vastness of human potentials. We explore the making of our world from quantum physics to parapsychology, health, sociology, and philosophy, along with practical living. You are reminded of the possibilities in creating personal change. So for an hour, we'll stimulate and expand the mind.
Shanti, 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 shanti. Sing the world. Let's do it together. Shanti, shanti, shanti. It's time to wake up. Shanti, shanti.
Well, welcome once again to the Expansion Zone. I am your host, Sonia Barrett. And as always, I'm delighted to be here on this Monday. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to 90.7 FM on your radio dial. And perhaps you are listening to the live stream on at kpfk.org. All of that is great, just as long as you're listening. So good to have you with me today, continuing this journey every week and see what more we can add to our expansion. But I do have to say, coming out of the holidays, my holidays, slash Christmas, it was definitely quiet, as probably it was for some people. But I just kind of felt like, man, can we just like get a do-over? I was not real enthusiastic about shopping. And that was my thought. Can we cancel the season of giving and cheer and just wait for a do-over? But however, I'm happy for those who were able to pull it off and to enjoy those that you were with. Those are the people that you were able to be with. So I just wanted to say that. But, I was still content in my own space. Let me say that I was still content in my own zone, my own space, but I just was not as excited to try to go shopping in the stores and all of that. But you know me anyway, that was just me. But it was still great. So let's see. I'm going to give you my Monday quote, but before that, I'm going to let you know who our guest is today, who is Judy Miller, author of Perfect: A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and Transformation. And so that's going to be fantastic chatting with her. And the topic, of course, which is an extension, the subtitle to her book as well. It's how releasing a story running one's life can lead to a path of individual and even generational healing. And I love that. So I can't wait to talk about that. But anyway, Monday's quote. And these quotes, I did 3. They're not really long, but I liked them so much that I ended up having to pick all 3 quotes. And the quote is, "Don't let a day of the week have so much power over your happiness." All right, that's one. And the second one is, "Your Monday morning thoughts set the tone for your whole week. See yourself getting stronger and living a fulfilling, happier, and healthier life." This is Germany Kent. That was that author. The other one was unknown. And the third one is "Perfect time to reboot your mind and have a fresh start." So, and I think these quotes are pretty self-explanatory, but we do sort of attach to certain conditions socially or culturally applied to certain days of the week, the work week and what that means for most. So Friday and Saturday are the days most people anxiously await. Sunday, of course, means that Monday is on its way. So it's really sort of interesting how we view that. And so we have to come to a place for ourselves where we start determining, what the days of the week are going to represent for us. And every day is new. So it's up to us. I get it. Monday, when you have to go to work, it's like, I completely understand that. But we have to find ways to transform that, particularly if it gets a little heavy where you're dreading Monday. Then we have to kind of navigate around that and figure out, why and how, and seeing where our power lies to make those changes. Anyway, all right. So the bio for our guest today, Judy started her career as a certified public accountant and went on to excel in the world of corporate finance. Most of her life has been dedicated to personal development and helping others excel in a constantly changing environment. Judy has trained with some of the world's most spiritual visionaries. As an author, coach, and speaker, she will inspire you to live a more passionate life filled with greater clarity, joy, and happiness. And I think that's what a lot of people wish that they could have, and not sure how to get there. Some people never figure it out, and some people do. So, Judy Miller, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the Expansion Zone.
It's so great to be here, Sonia. I loved your Monday quotes.
Yes, I love doing these quotes. I love finding quotes. It's, I started doing one a while back, a couple years ago, and then it felt good to just throw one in, one or two in every week. So you have been on quite a journey, as we all have, but yours was of transformation that was absolutely essential and necessary, it sounds like, at a particular stage in your life. So would you, I think, just set the stage a bit, on your life? You said you were an accountant. Is it an accountant, wife, mother, raising children? I kind of look at some of that as our, auto self prior to the experiences that would unfold, and perhaps, trigger change. So you can set the stage a little bit on when everything felt, ideal because of all those conditions that were there at the time.
I would love to, Sonia. And I'd love to start by asking you and your listeners 3 questions. So, Sonia, have you ever felt different, like you didn't belong?
Oh, my listeners are laughing because they're like, we still don't know if she belongs. Yeah, well, I've always felt different, but I don't. Yeah, for me, I don't know if I ever felt like I didn't belong. I just always felt, the world was different. I was different, and it was just always interesting to me. So I get that, though, from a lot of people who didn't feel like they belong, like they fell from some planet or the other.
And then I just have another question for you and your listeners. Have you ever felt incomplete, maybe searching for someone or something outside of yourself to make you feel whole?
Oh, I think that's everybody at some point have gone through that journey of externalizing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the very last question. Have you ever felt unworthy, always having to prove yourself over and over again?
I think that's something that a lot of people experience, I think, as well. Absolutely. I think we experience so many of these different things, some people to more extreme degrees.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I ask you and your listeners these questions, because these feelings have literally plagued me for most of my life, but I learned how to let them go. And the whole purpose of writing my story and sharing it with people is to really share with them how to let go of their own stories. So I was actually born in Trinidad. And if you don't know where Trinidad is, it's actually an island in the Caribbean right off the coast of South America.
Well, I was born in Jamaica, so.
Oh, look at that. I knew I liked you right away.
That's what it is.
And I actually moved to the U.S. when I was very, very young.
Same here.
And I didn't look like other people in my neighborhood. And this is not about race or discrimination. I just didn't feel like I fit in. I was also born with 11 fingers. And I also had the ability to sense and feel different energies, especially at night. But no matter what I did, I always felt like I wasn't enough. As you mentioned in the introduction, I started my career as a CPA. I went to work for one of the big four accounting firms, and I actually graduated from the Harvard Business School's executive leadership program. But no matter what I did, it never felt like it was enough. I actually felt like I was nothing. But on this journey, what I learned was that in the nothingness, I could be anything that I wanted. And what I mean by that is when we drop our stories, our labels, and our judgments, we could be anything that we want. We could emerge as our true and authentic selves. So as you mentioned in the introduction, the subtitle to my book, Perfect, is called A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and Transformation. And so many people ask me, what does forgiveness mean? And what I've come to realize is that so many people have different definitions. But for me, Sonia, it's really, really simple. It means to forgo or to let go of. So we're all going to have painful and unwanted experience in our lives. We could either experience it once, or we could literally play it over and over again in our minds until it becomes stuck. It becomes our identity. So for me, forgiveness is really just letting go of those contracted negative stories that no longer serve us, so we could emerge and move forward in our lives as our true and authentic selves. And I really do believe that forgiveness is a gift. It's a gift that we give ourselves, and it's an act of self-love.
Yes, forgiveness is huge, because many people go through their lives not being able to let go. And I think this is attached to all of it when people say, I can forgive, but I can't forget. And I think a lot of times they don't realize that they really haven't forgiven. They're still attached to that whole idea. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'd love to give you and your listeners kind of an overview of my journey, and then everything will start to fall into place.
Absolutely.
So as a child, I had many fears. I know many children have fears. One of my fears was actually the fear of drowning, but I was also terrified of the night. I was also afraid of being sexually assaulted. I had actually never been assaulted. So as you can imagine, as a child, these fears were extremely confusing. And I was afraid of going to sleep every night. I would literally crawl into bed. I would pull the covers over my head, and I would recite the Lord's Prayer over and over again until exhausted I would fall asleep. And this was my nightly ritual, and it continued well into my 20s. As we mentioned before, I started my career as a CPA, very traditional lifestyle, very traditional profession. So I went to work during the day, and then at night, I would crawl back into bed terrified of what I couldn't explain. And then I actually met my husband at work. He's also a CPA, and we got married and had 2 incredible children. And in the exhaustion of raising 2 kids, commuting 3 hours a day to work and working 40 to 50 hours a week, in that exhaustion, everything stopped. The terror stopped, the subtle whispers, the energies, all of it stopped. But Sonia, my kids grew up, and then they went off to college, and the house became silent. And many empty nesters may know what that sounds like. But in the silence, everything returned. It always felt like someone was standing behind me, or if there were eyes staring at me from across the room. And I do have to say, I probably looked comical to my neighbors, because I literally would tiptoe around the house, afraid of who or what I might encounter. I would wake up in the middle of the night, clutching at my husband in fear, and soon we both began to lose sleep. So Sonia, around the same time, I actually started to bleed uncontrollably month after month. And my doctor told me that I needed to get a hysterectomy. And I was terrified of this surgery. And I couldn't really understand why. So after working in public accounting as a CPA, I went to work in healthcare. I was a finance director in the healthcare industry for over 20 years. So I trust modern medicine. But I was terrified of this surgery. And Sonia, it felt like the same terror that I had as a child and the same terror that returned to me as an adult. So a very good friend of mine recommended that I read a book called Light Emerging. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it was written by Barbara Brennan. Barbara Brennan was actually a former NASA physicist, and she studied the human energy field. And what she learned, she was actually able to heal people with her hands. And I'd never heard of anything like this. But days before my surgery, I actually found myself Googling healers near me. And Sonia, as I sat across from my healer for that very first time, I heard the click of a lock. It was like if my entire life was finally locking into place. And I know that might sound a little strange or odd, but I felt like my life was finally locking into place. But at the time, I didn't know the role that healer actually played in my family's history. So my healer helped me heal after my surgery. And in the following months, we actually continued to work together to explore this uncontrollable fear that I had of the dark. And I never mentioned to her this fear of sexual assault. So in the following months, we began to explore a lot of topics that I had never heard of. Remember, I was a CPA in a very traditional profession. She introduced me to past lives, and past lives was something that I had actually never heard of. She introduced me to the amazing work of Dr. Michael Newton, Dolores Cannon, and Dr. Brian Weiss. And Dr. Brian Weiss was a very prominent psychiatrist in Miami. And he had a patient, and her name was Catherine. And Catherine had these unexplainable fears and phobias just like I did. And quite by accident, during hypnosis, she actually regressed back to previous lifetimes that she had, and where she actually had that fear and the pain originated. And by understanding where it came from, she was actually able to let go of it and be healed. So I was really amazed with this. I actually, when I saw Dr. Brian Weiss was actually having a conference, I signed up for it immediately. Sonia, there were hundreds, maybe even thousands of people who were in the audience, and I never realized that past lives was something that was so mainstream or acceptable. But Dr. Weiss said that over 50% of the people in the audience would actually have a past life regression. So as the lights dimmed and he started to regress people backwards, Sonia, I totally fell asleep. When he started to bring us out, I heard the snoring of myself snoring. So that was my very first experience with past life regressions. It wasn't very successful, but I did get a good nap.
Yeah, oh my gosh. But I think one of the things, I mean, I'll let you pick up, but I think one of the things that you mentioned is how all of those things kind of went away when you were in your busyness of your automated life. And it's very common, this distraction, raising kids, doing all of those things. I don't think people realize that we love when we're doing it, but I don't think a lot of people realize that how it becomes a distraction. And that's why even marriages fall apart. I've met many people where after the children left the house, everything started to show up. Suddenly they're trying to figure out who they are. And I've met people who said that they had to get therapy. So, this is very real for a lot of people, being introduced to themselves and their fears.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have different stages of life. Absolutely. So, Sonia, I continued to work with my healer. And then we started to talk about my parents, because we know that we inherit so many things from our parents: the color of our hair, the color of our skin, the shape of our nose, and so many other physical characteristics. But then we also started to talk about the science of epigenetics. And I don't know how familiar your listeners are with the science of epigenetics.
Yeah, no, they're familiar.
Oh, perfect. So the science of epigenetics actually tells us that we could inherit the pain and the trauma from our parents. And not only our parents, but our ancestors. They've actually shown with Holocaust survivors that these survivors, the pain and the terror that they experienced often were triggered in their children, but not just their children, but their grandchildren. And they've actually shown recently with experiments where they introduced the smell of cherry blossoms to mice and then gently zapped the mice on the feet. And of course, Sonia, as you can imagine, it just, after a while, just the scent of cherry blossoms would trigger that same fear and panic in these poor mice. But what was amazing to me was that the mice's children and their children, just the scent of cherry blossoms would trigger the same fear that their parents had. But what was even truly more amazing was that these mice were never zapped. And they were never exposed to the father that was zapped. So they also say that every female baby is born with 2 to 3 million of their reproductive eggs at birth. So for much of your mother's young life, you were actually in there as an unborn egg. So the triumphs and the traumas that she experienced, you were actually there also. So what we uncovered was that pain and that terror that I felt every night, and that fear of being assaulted, wasn't actually my experience. It was actually the cellular memory of when my mother was attacked when she was 12 years old. And I actually never knew that, Sonia, until about 3 years ago when I started to go through this journey.
That's so powerful, though. I think that piece right there is so very powerful, which we see that today with a lot of what people are walking around with and have no idea why they feel the way that they feel. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recently saw a picture. It was a picture of a grandmother, and inside the grandmother was her daughter, and inside the daughter was the 2 to 3 million reproductive eggs that we were just talking about. So, for 3 generations, people are experiencing these things. But what I love is that certain indigenous cultures in America say that when we heal, we actually heal 7 generations back, and we heal 7 generations forward.
I love it. I love it. I just think that is just so profound. Yes, I'm aware of that, but it is very profound, and it makes you want to go ahead and embark on a healing journey. Not everybody, but it definitely stimulates that you would like to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. But Sonia, my story actually doesn't end there. There's actually a shocking past life connection to that very healer that I trusted to heal me in this lifetime. Mm-hmm. She was actually the very person that attacked my mother. And
That's
I know
what I
that
figured.
And I know that it sounds a little unusual, a little uncommon, but in that moment of revelation, Sonia, I could have felt fear, anger, maybe even betrayal, but I didn't. All I felt was the unconditional love and acceptance of the universe. I actually saw how all of our souls are interconnected across lifetimes, and how we could always heal in any moment in this lifetime or in any other. And what was so important to me was the fact that we were so unconditionally loved by the Creator, the God of our understanding. Because as I mentioned before, I felt unworthy, I felt different, I felt incomplete. So a lot of my journey and a lot of what I share in my book as well as with listeners is how I learned how to let go of my stories.
That's the huge, a huge part of this whole thing is people being able to let go of their stories, because the stories absolutely run our lives, and depends on how many different stories you're running at the same time, but they run our lives, and we make all of our choices from this place. So now so you've given us a little bit of a background on all of that. So that turning point. Now, was the turning point to wanting to discover this, was it right there with the surgery that was going to happen? I believe that's what you were saying.
So everything kind of came together with the surgery, meeting the healer. Everything came together at that point.
Mm-hmm. Now, this just kind of came to mind right here. Now, with the hysterectomy, with the bleeding, it just feels like it was connected to this story, these conditions that you were naming, from your past, your mother's past. I mean, that just sort of popped up. I don't know if there was any connection ever made in your mind about it, but
absolutely, you're absolutely 100% correct, because our bodies are infinitely intelligent. And the traumas that we experience and the traumas that our ancestors experience actually get trapped in our bodies. And they actually get associated with specific areas. So in this case, when my mother was attacked, she was sexually assaulted. So of course, where did the trauma reside? It resided in my uterus. Mm-hmm. So there's been lots of work done. The late Louise Hay wrote the book, You Can Heal Your Life. And there's so many other wonderful people who talk about this, such as John Newton. But for example, and these are gross generalizations because everybody's a little bit different, but sometimes when you have a pain in your shoulder, it could be because a story or a trauma that you experienced about not feeling safe. With your knees and your legs, it could be something that you experienced about not being able to move forward. So our bodies are so infinitely intelligent. So absolutely exactly what you said before.
Yes. Well, our body is always in communication with us. I just think we haven't been taught. That's not been part of our, I don't know if I want to say culture, but as human beings, most human beings are not taught about the language of the body or communication with the body or being able to listen to the body. And obviously that's why we do so much externalizing. But yes, everything is going to be lodged in some part of the body. And I think, a lot of times the more vulnerable part of your body, and in this case, that area of your body, the womb or that part of your body was the most vulnerable because of what you basically inherit, the history you inherited.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. I believe that our bodies tell the truth. Our mind doesn't always tell the truth. So I'd love to just give you a very, very simple example. So before we got on this interview, my throat started to get dry. My heart started to race. My stomach started to flutter. Those are sensations. I could have easily labeled those sensations as nervousness. But Sonia, those are the same exact sensations I feel when I'm excited. It's me that determined the story that I gave to those sensations.
Absolutely. And that's powerful right there. Because we have the power to determine how we're going to interpret what we interpret. But then again, too, you've come into this awareness. And so you're making that assessment and now sharing it. But then there are people who haven't come into that awareness yet, and their story is all about maybe being victimized or being vulnerable, or not being, I'm going to say good enough. That's not really the word I want to use, but whatever the story is. So naturally they immediately associate those I don't want to say symptoms, but those signals or experiences in the body as a negative.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So, I have an acronym that I use. I call it NEST, N-E-S-T, just like a bird's nest. And I'd love to share with you because it kind of helps people learn how to let go of those stories.
Yes, do. And then we're going to take a break right after you do that,
Sure.
right after you share it.
So I might not be able to get through all of it before the break, but you let me
unless you want to. Well, you know what? Because I'd like for you to share it in a flow. Then let's go ahead and let's go to break. I think this is such a delightful conversation right now, folks. It's a necessary conversation for anybody out there, anybody at all, whether you're feeling, down or alone or fear, whatever. I think there's so much takeaway here from for all of us. Anyway, all right. Well, just stay tuned, and we will be right back after this very brief break. And we are back. Of course, you're tuned in to KPFK 90.7 FM, and you're listening to The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett, and that would be me, your host. And of course, you are also listening to my guest, Judy Miller, author of Perfect, A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and Transformation. And what's the subtitle, which is very important? How Releasing a Story Running One's Life can lead to a path of individual and even generational healing. Very, very significant here, the generational healing aspect. So it's not just healing yourself in that moment, but we heal forwards and backwards. So I love it. So anyway, all right, let's pick up and hear that what you'd like to share with us right now.
Sure. So I use an acronym called NEST, N-E-S-T, to help people let go of their stories. And the N stands for notice or become aware of your stories. So Sonia, we have 60,000 thoughts a day, 95% of them the same ones we had yesterday and the day before, and 80% of them are quite negative. So as humans, we're actually hardwired to notice and to remember the negative aspects of a situation. And that's because thousands of years ago, when we had to hunt and gather for food, it was critical for survival. But we no longer live in that reality. So we need to change that. So whenever you have a negative thought, just observe it and then flick it off before it takes root. So there's a book or a pamphlet that Emmett Fox wrote. It's called The 7-Day Mental Diet. He wrote it in the 1930s. He was so advanced for his times. But basically, he said not having a negative thought for 7 days is probably one of the most difficult things that you could ever do. But after those 7 days, your life will be totally transformed. So again, he wrote this in the 1930s, and the analogy that he used was observe that thought. When it starts to come into your awareness and it starts to land on your shirt sleeve, just flick it off. So I kind of do that whenever I start to have that negative thought. I just flick it off, because between stimulus and response, we know that there is a gap. So we can observe the thoughts that we're having. So many of us just operate on autopilot. So again, N is to notice or become aware of the stories that we're actually creating. Because I believe the most dangerous aspect of an unwanted event is not the event itself. It's actually the story that we're creating about the event. So before we create the story, just flick it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
and then the E stands for experience the emotion and let it go. It gets back to what you were talking about before about the body, right? So we talked about the sensations in our body. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor was a Harvard neuroscientist, and she wrote the book, My Stroke of Insight. And she talked about the 90-second rule. And this is what really struck out for me. When an event happens, either good or bad, it literally just takes our bodies 90 seconds to process it through our physiology and then let it go. After those 90 seconds, it's up to us. We could either truly just let that event go, or we can create a story. We can create a story that's empowering, or we can create a story that's disempowering. But many of us create that disempowering story. So I believe our greatest superpower is really the power to choose whether or not to let it go or to create that story. Okay? So,
Go ahead.
so we were talking before about how the body is so infinitely intelligent, right? So when an event happens, notice, Sonia, where it happens. Where do you feel it in your body? Instead of thinking about it, notice where you feel it in your body and acknowledge the sensation. You can put your hand on it, and if you can't reach it, so for example, it's in your back, you could just imagine it. It's just as effective. And just breathe your loving presence into it, and then just let it go. And you'll be amazed that when you start to do this, you can actually start letting go of those stories that you were previously creating. So that's the E. The S stands for scratch the record. And many of these you probably know. So when you start to become aware of that negative story, you can say cancel, cancel. You can say cancel, clear. Many people use a rubber band on their wrist and, they zing themselves. And I believe the reason that works is because it disrupts the story. It gets them out of their mind and back into their body. And the one that I love the most, I learned from Tony Robbins many, many years ago, and I call it zany crazy thing. So whenever you get in a rut or you have a certain pattern, let me give you an example. For example, sometimes my husband and I get into an argument. And I don't know if you've ever been in this situation, but you're arguing and you're so stuck and you have to prove yourself. You have to prove that you're right. And you're saying yes.
Yeah.
So we know that we don't want to be in that rut. We don't.
I'm like, so you're saying I'm not right?
So what we do, we agreed in advance whenever we get into that storytelling in our mind, one of us, whoever remembers first, will reach over and grab the other one by the nose. And of course, Sonia, you can imagine, we start laughing uncontrollably. Mm-hmm. We've disrupted that story. And often we can then afterwards talk more sanely. But I encourage you and your listeners, when you know you have that certain story, that certain pattern in your life, come up in advance with something zany or crazy to disrupt your own story.
Oh, it works. I mean, yeah. One of mine is just stop. One of my, in workshops that I do, but one of mine is just, I've just done that where I caught myself and I just go stop. And it is whatever works for you. And you gave some great tools that a person can start out with in using them, because it's just about the interrupter. Can you find a way to interrupt that story that you're getting ready to record or tell yourself repeatedly?
Exactly. And I would love to share with you. So we're talking about the stories that don't serve us. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to share, while we're still on the S, 2 stories that I think are extremely powerful before we get to the T, if that's okay with you.
Oh, that's fine.
And the reason I want to share these 2 stories is because I believe once we change our perspective, everything changes, life changes, because we can no longer look at life the same way. And I believe these 2 stories have done that for me in my own life, and I believe it could help other people as well. So there is a children's book called Little Soul in the Sun, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was actually written by Neil Donald Walsh. Neil Donald Walsh wrote Conversations with God, and he took one of the premises and he wrote a children's book called Little Soul in the Sun. And I used to read it to my children when they were young. But in heaven, everything is perfect. And we can't experience our perfection because there's no opposite. We can't experience light because there's no darkness, right? And in heaven, everything is perfect. And we agree to come to earth to learn our lessons. But when we come to earth, we're pretending so hard to be what we're not that we forget who we are. So in this book, there's a little soul that wants to learn forgiveness. And God says there's nothing to forgive here. Everything is perfect. And God says, is there anybody who will help you or volunteer? And nobody wants to raise their hand. And then the little soul was so upset. And then finally, this angel of light comes forward. And she says, I will help you. I will go to earth with you, and I will do something so terrible that you will learn how to forgive me, and you will learn unconditional love. But when we go to earth, in that moment that I strike you, please remind me of who I am, because I would be pretending so hard to be what I'm not that I would have forgotten. And the reason I like to share this story with people is because when something happens to us that causes us to contract, maybe that person was the person that raised their hand, that angel of light that raised their hand to help you because they loved you. And I think that just puts a different perspective on the people in my life and the things that happen. And I think it might be able to do that for your listeners as well. So that's the first story. The second story is the Taoist fable. So Sonia, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Taoist fable. Mm-hmm. So the Taoist fable is a story about, it's thousands of years old. It's about a farmer and his prized possession, which is his horse. And one day the horse runs away, and the farmer's neighbor come over and say, oh, how unfortunate that your horse ran away. And the farmer says, maybe. And then the next day, the horse actually returns with 12 wild horses for the farmer to train. And then the neighbors come back over and say, how fortunate. And the farmer says, maybe. And then the next day, the farmer's son is training the wild horses, and he falls and he breaks his legs. And the neighbors come back over and they say, how unfortunate. And the farmer says, maybe. And then the next day, an army comes through the town, enlisting all eligible men, and the farmer's son is spared because of his injury. And the neighbors come back over again and say, how fortunate. And the farmer says, maybe. And this story can go back and forth, like this. But as you can see, the farmer refuses to label the events of life.
Right.
And by not labeling them, he's able to weather them more easily.
Oh,
so
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I do believe that when we take that 1,000-foot view of our life, all of those events interconnect into a much richer tapestry and a much richer story of our lives.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Those are great stories because, yes, we are used to polarizing everything. It's either good or bad, black or white, positive or negative. And we just need to trap it into one of those. And so those stories are really great because it really does show that you have no idea why whatever it is happening. It's, everything is happening truly for a reason, and there's no coincidence. And that's how I feel anyway. There is definitely a reason for it. And I think if everybody kind of looks at their lives, there's so many things throughout the course of our life that we can look at where we were upset and we were disappointed. That's the word. We were disappointed because we didn't get that job or, whatever didn't happen. And then later on in your life, you realize that was probably the best thing that happened to you, could have happened to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, Sonia, the last letter is the T. Mm-hmm. And T stands for tender, loving care. And I believe that many people feel isolated and alone. And, many people believe it's because of COVID-19, but I believe a lot of the isolation and loneliness that many people feel, even pre-COVID, is because so many of us have abandoned ourselves physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And
Very true.
And I think it's so important for us to spend time reconnecting with ourselves. It's not arrogant. It's not selfish. When we love ourselves more deeply, we have more love to give to others. And people tell me, well, I don't feel the love. And I'd love to just walk through just a quick experience with you and your listeners. So if you're willing to play with me, I invite you to close your eyes, Sonia.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's safe for your listeners, if they can close their eyes as well. And I want you to bring in a loving memory or experience into your life or into your memory. It could be an image or memory of the first time you met your partner. It could be a memory with your children or a friend or even a pet. And I want you to visualize that memory, but not just visualize it, experience it. What were you feeling? Maybe you can hear the sounds, smell the scents if you were outside. And I want you to feel that loving memory in every cell of your body. And just take a moment to really cherish it and experience it. And then I want you to multiply that sensation 2 times more. And then I want you to bring in another image or memory. Maybe it's the first time you ever saw a sunset. Or the first time you saw snowfall. Or maybe that very first time that you held a child in your hand. Or that very first kiss. And again, experience everything and feel everything in that moment. And sometimes people tell me that they can't think of anything. It could be something that you want. You could just imagine it. What are the sensations of love that are moving through your body? And I want you to put your hand gently on your heart. And I learned this from my mentor, Dr. Sue Morter. Put your hand on your heart and magnify that love even more. And say, this love is for me. This love is me. And Sonia, when you're ready to open your eyes, you can do that. But what I wanted to just stress is that literally took us probably less than a minute. But we can generate that sensation of love in any moment, in any time. It's not dependent on anyone or anything. And what I've learned is that sensation could be used for so many things. It could be used to heal. So if there's a part of your body that feels contracted or you may have a pain in it, and again, if you need to seek medical attention, I recommend you go see a doctor. But many people have found profound results by sending that sensation of love that you just created to the parts of your body that perhaps need to heal. And then what also I find very powerful is that when you want to manifest something, we've heard from the law of attraction, it's not just important to say the affirmations or just think about it in our mind. They tell you that you have to experience it in your body. What are you feeling? But if you truly want to magnify and accelerate the manifestation of your desires and your dreams, love into it. Send love into it. And you will be amazed at how much you can actually manifest. So Sonia, that was the tea.
Yeah, no, I think that was really wonderful. I mean, these are powerful exercises. They are simple, but they are powerful. And I think many of the things that we can do, they really are so simple. But I think we are also used to complexity. We're used to trying to solve a problem and then make things more difficult. But it's that simple. So that was fantastic. And I do encourage those who are listening, especially if you are in the house a lot, you're not doing, getting out a lot, you are experiencing not severe depression. Obviously, you do need assistance then, but, the frustration with everything going on as well. I think these are great tools to really go within, to really turn in on yourself and give yourself that peace that you're looking for, that balance.
And Sonia, I agree with you. When things are too complex, I tend to have resistance to it. So I do describe, in addition to, so my book Perfect is actually written in kind of like 3 sections. 80 to 90% of it is actually the story. And there's some other parts of the book that I'd love to share with you. But there's a handful of pages that I call reflections that basically teach people what are the key lessons in the book that they could apply in their own lives. And then the last section is some very simple exercises. And exactly what you said, I made them purposely simple because I know how busy people are. So I'd just love to share 3 very, very quick ones. Everything in life is energy. And I'm amazed that science has actually shown that our thoughts are energy. But everything in life is energy, just vibrating at different frequencies. Our bodies are made of energy. And I found that when I felt stuck and stagnated in my life, my energy was stuck. So we need to move our energy. So exactly as you said, during these times, we need to be able to, if we can, move our body, do things in a joyous way, walk outside if we can. Just find some way to move your energy. The other one that's really simple is to sing. I've always struggled with finding my voice in the world. So when my mother was attacked, she was told never to speak of this again. So my mom always suffered from her ability to use her voice. And I believe that's something that I inherited as well. So my healer told me to sing. So by singing, it actually gets my throat chakra activated. And one of the secrets of the throat chakra is not just finding your voice, but manifesting what you want in the world, speaking out into the world what you want. So my healer told me I needed to sing, and singing actually opens up your other chakras as well. So Sonia, I was in finance. I used to do lots of presentations. So before a presentation, I would actually sneak out into the parking lot, get into my car, turn the radio up, and sing at the top of my lungs. Then I would sneak back into the office and do my presentation. But not only did it open my throat chakra, it actually gave me the forward momentum to continue. So I encourage people to sing. And then the last one is really simple. It's to create, because we are the creator. We are the creators of our lives. We are a creative life force. And when we don't create, our energy becomes stuck. And that stuck energy can manifest as pain and potentially sickness. So find some way to express your creativity. You know, for me, I played the classical guitar. If you remember not too long ago, adult coloring books was so popular.
Yes.
But Sonia, what I found is it doesn't even have to be that complex. We can infuse creativity into every aspect of our lives, in the way that we dress. And I know that many teenage children, that's how they express their creativity. But we could express it in the way that we decorate our homes and the meals that we create. So we are a creative life force, so we need to create.
Absolutely. And the imagination needs to be active. And that's creativity and imagination go hand in hand. So yes, cooking for me is one of those things that I love to do. It just relaxes me. Plus, I get to come up with all kinds of different things. My husband will go, "What is this called?" I go, "I have no idea." He goes, "I don't know. It's good though. I don't know what it's called. I made it up. I get the taste in my mouth of combinations, which I think a lot of cooks are like that. There's a taste that you get if you combine the foods. This is in your mind. You combine it, and then you get this idea of what it's supposed to taste like, and then you make it, and it's like, oh wow, boom, there it is right there. So yeah, I do agree with that. Now, please let the audience know where they can get a copy of your book and anything else that you would like them to know in terms of, if you do workshops on Zoom or, whatever, anything at all.
Sure. So my website is Judy, and I spell my name with an I. So it's Judy, Judi, Miller, MILLER.net. So it's .net, not .com. So judymiller.net. And if you go to my website, you could actually get a copy of my free ebook. It talks about some of these very simple exercises to move the energy in our bodies. And my free ebook is called Awaken the Creator Within. You could buy my book, Perfect, A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and Transformation on Amazon, as well as any other retail. But I recommend Amazon because you can actually buy it directly from my site. So wherever you buy the book, I encourage you to go back to my website, because when you buy the book, the physical copy or the electronic copy, you get 5 free bonus gifts. And Sonia, the 5 free bonus gifts are some of my from some of my top transformational friends and teachers and mentors. So I believe all four of them actually sit on the Transformational Leadership Council, and their free gifts will help you to, achieve more happiness, success, love in your life. So if you do buy the book, I encourage you, please get the 5 free gifts. And I'm also a coach, so I do work with people just in terms of helping them to move their energy. I do ancestral healing as well. So, please check out my website.
Oh, fantastic. Perfect time. Again, perfect time for all of this healing, which, I think in general, this period is happening for all of those things to really happen. Somehow, it's a significant time in our cycle as human beings for, I think, different levels of healing to take place, despite how it appears on the outside. But it's sort of forcing people to make those moves at this time, and so that when we get on the other side of this, more people will be transformed and ready for whoever they are going to be, or however they're going to project their lives on the other side of much of what's going on right now.
Yeah. And I don't know if we have more time, but I'd love to share
we have
some
a few minutes. Mm-hmm.
Love to share some other quick stories from the book. So the first story, actually, it started in church. I was just sitting in church on Good Friday, literally just minding my business, watching the choir sing before mass started. And my kids were texting each other next to themselves. And then as I just sat there, this overwhelming sense of love literally just descended upon me out of nowhere. And so many of my experiences sound like near-death experiences, but I wasn't dying. And some people might call it dying with your eyes wide open, or maybe you might even call it awakening. But as I sat there, this overwhelming sense of love descended upon me. And Sonia, it was every type of love you could possibly imagine or describe, multiplied 1,000,000 times over. And I just started to cry because I couldn't hold the love inside of me. And my book is not religious, but the reason I wanted to share this story was because if we knew how much we were loved, we would never doubt ourselves again. So I think that's such an important message for people to hear.
Oh, absolutely.
The second story, just really quickly, is as I was laying in bed, recovering from my hysterectomy, I refused to take painkillers just because I had worked in the healthcare industry and I heard so many tragic stories about people becoming addicted. So I didn't take any painkillers. And as I laid in bed, I tried to stay absolutely still because every sneeze, every movement would literally feel like an electric shock shooting through my body. And as I laid there, this presence just kind of drifted in and out of my awareness. And it sounded like an Irish guide. And again, I know some of these sound a little unusual or uncommon, but I believe the messages is what gives us all hope. And she said that we're never alone, never abandoned, always loved. If we knew who stood beside us, we would never be afraid. And Sonia, I invite you, if you knew who stood beside you, what would you dare to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then if there's time, I'd love to share 2 other quick stories.
Well, we have about a minute and a half. So if you can throw in a quick story in at least in the next minute and a half, we're good.
Sure, I'd love to. So I mentioned to you that my first past life regression, I fell asleep. So when my healer offered to do it in her office, I jumped at the opportunity. And as I laid on the table being hypnotized, I actually felt myself rising through a purple haze and then out into this bright white light again. And again, it does sound like a near-death experience. But in that bright white light, I got another message that I think is so important for us at this time. And the message was, we can all come home. We can all come home by loving and accepting who we are, exactly as we are. And that the joy is in the reunion and the remembrance of who we are. Because so many of us beat ourselves up, and we don't need to. We're already perfect.
Oh, awesome. Yes. Thank you so much for that. Yes, that piece where we don't need to because we're already perfect. Everything is what it needs to be in the moment and who you are. So thank you so much. And before we go, as it relates to everything that's been talked about today, this is a quote that actually I had done, obviously, way before this interview and had posted. And it says, this is what I wrote. We live a life of cycles, yet every moment is new. it is you who recycles your stories. So it falls in line with all of this. So I do want to thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of what you did. Thank you so much, Judy.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Sonia.
All right. And thank you to the listening audience. And thank you to D'Angelo Jones, our engineer. And do visit theexpansionzone.com for the archive where this show will be listed. And it will also be featured on the homepage as well. All new shows are. So be sure to visit theexpansionzone.com. Also, YouTube channel, subscribe, lots of things being posted there, and Instagram and so on. If you want to know more about me and my work, visit therealsoniabarrett.com. And that's it. And as always, I do like to remind you to live life to its fullest and question everything. Until next time, see you then.
Everybody's talking about consciousness. Everybody wants